¿cómo estás?
So, no, hola, buenas tardes. Kate Fowle, directora de PS1, y yo soy Magalí Arriola, directora del Museo Tamayo. Vamos a hablar en inglés, espero que esté bien, yo supongo que ya sabrían, pero nada más para avisar porque Kate no habla español. So how should we start? Un poquito. How should we start? Do you want to...
Well, what we thought would be interesting is to, because we've had many conversations together, but not in public. So we thought it would be interesting to have a conversation between us, but make it a bit more public. And it's interesting, I was trying to work out the other day how long we've actually known each other. And I can't remember, is it like
2003.
2003,
so
yeah.
16 years, pretty much. Heading to 17.
Yeah. So I thought that I would start to ask Magalí a few questions, because I'm sure that you are much more aware of what Magalí is doing because she's at the Tamayo. So I thought I would start to ask her questions as to what she's thinking in terms of what she's interested in moving forward, because I want to know, so maybe some of you want to know as well. And then it'll kind of develop a bit more into a conversation, because then Magalí can ask me questions back. But I started at PS1 on September 3rd, so it's been 5 months, and you started...
On September 17.
Yeah, so there's about 2 weeks between us. So what made you interested in the job at Tamayo and taking on the directorship?
Well, like, first of all, that's a place that I really know well, because I studied art history in Paris, and then when I came back, my first job was at Tamayo as a researcher working at the educational department. So I was like writing labels for the collection, so I got to know the collection at that time, and like I worked there for a couple of years.
So when was that?
92, so a long time ago. And then I went to another museum, to the Centro Cultural Arte Contemporáneo, and then back to the Tamayo. I can't remember right now in which capacity, but I was just like, like started doing shows there. And of course, like at that point, the world wasn't what it is, and there wasn't, like the kind of like communication systems that we have, and like social networks, all of that. So everything was really, like made pretty much over the phone and faxes, no, back then, which was like lucky enough already. So when I would travel, like for other things, and I would be at the museum, Cristina Galvez, who was the director at the time, she basically would just like call me up and tell me, like, can you go and meet Nikki de Sanfalo, can you go and meet like these other people? So that's when I started, like getting my head around curatorial work. And then, where did I go? Then I started working independently, and the first show that I really created was at the Tamayo again, which was a Peter Greenaway show. And from there,
it's amazing how many times you have actually done.
I've been like in and out quite a few times. Then I moved to Carrillo Hill, then Independent again, and then in 2010 I went back to the Tamayo as chief curator when Sofia Hernandez was director. Mm-hmm. And then I went to Jumex and then Independent again. So it's been like really, it really feels like home for me. And half of the team that works there I've known, like since like 1992, which is great because it's a fantastic team. So that was like really a reason for me to definitely also take the job, because I knew, like there was like a great support, like inside support, and then yes, I don't know, I've been doing like curatorial work for like all these years, like the Peter Greenaway show was in 1997, so it's been.
The what show?
Peter Greenaway.
Okay.
So it's been like pretty much like 20 years of curating, and I thought it was just about time, like because I really feel that I've done many shows that I really wanted to do, that I've explored like in curatorial terms, like many things I wanted to explore. And now, like it's just, I guess it's just like getting older and, like probably less anxious about things. I think it's it was about time to, like get all of that training together and just like apply it to, not to a single exhibition, but to a whole, like institution, in terms not only of programming exhibitions, like in such a way as they could make like a, like a organic body of work, but also in terms of whatever you can do with the educational department, the public programming, even like in terms of design, like, and how, like use social media, how you reach out, which communities you reach out to. So I just felt it was just about time to, like get all of that together and apply it. So.
Can I see a show of hands? How many of you have spent time at Tamayo? Yes, so it is like the majority. How many of you have been to Tamayo, like, say, 10, 15 years ago? Okay, yeah, so it's, a lot of people know it newer than...
Probably. Yeah, it's been, I get actually that all the time, which is great. Like, people from a younger generation than mine, of course, just like telling me, like, I remember this one show or this other show, like, not even knowing that I created it. But, like, it really feels like, again, like home, and it really feels that that's, I know it's one of my favorite museums for my own personal history, but it's also, like, I know it's like a museum that really has like a deep impact on, like, people.
I mean, it's interesting to me because it's an incredible building. I mean, I just think it's so cool and so beautiful. And then it's got this kind of history that comes from an artist, and then it has this kind of curatorial history as well, because it's one of the main spaces that has always done kind of international, it's reached out internationally. As you say, it's changed over the years as the concept of what international is has changed, but it's always reached out. So I wonder, just to push you a bit more, like with that building, with the history of like it being artist-led or driven, what does that mean to you when you walk into there? It's like, is that important to the way that you're thinking about the future of the museum?
Definitely. No, definitely, because I think, like really Tamayo was a uber generous person, and he's like in this country, I could think of him and Toledo, who recently passed, as like really the main two figures that have like really shaped the like the path that contemporary art could take in a way. Because what is really interesting about the Tamayo itself and its mission and vision, its original mission and vision, which I would like to stick to somehow, is that Tamayo really conceived it as a place for, like the Mexican audience to get in touch with contemporary art. So that's a very important thing, because there's always a confusion, like people coming to a museum and wanting to see Tamayo's work, and we have a very, very small collection of Tamayos. We only have 11 paintings of him. So of course, like his legacy is very important, his own artistic legacy, but like the core of the museum is really the collection. And it's a fantastic collection again that he built, like very specifically for this. Like he early on started like exchanging his own work for other people's work, but then he started buying, and he really, like bought many of the works with the museum in mind. So definitely, like that's something I want to, like stick to, because we get to travel a lot, like as art professionals, but it's true that, like students and then many other people don't get to see, like whatever is happening there. And if I think about the, like now that I'm back and revisiting the history of the museum, and just like, through my own memories too, because the museum opened in '81, so I was like, getting to my teens, and that's when you probably have like better memories of things. They were doing shows at the time of Guillermo Cuitca, Julian Schnabel, like really Sandro Chia, like really those people who were like important at that time. So like really, like the big younger names of contemporary art. So I think it's really, like I want to stick to that, like to keep going in those terms, and then of course, like rethink, and that's going to take a longer, like conversation, and it's going to take longer for me to rethink like the internal role of the institution and how I want to, like articulate that too. But what about you? What about PS1? Because it has a very, very particular history too, no? Very heavy one and very interesting one in terms of it having been, as opposed to the Tamayo with a proper collection and all of that, PS1 doesn't have a collection, and it was more like this kind of alternative space.
Yeah.
So
How many of you have been to PS1? Whoa. Okay. So PS1 started in 1976. And it was founded by Alana Heiss, who is not an artist, but she's friends with lots of artists. And it basically comes out of the alternative space movement in the 70s. Because it was a way, there's a prehistory to it, which is basically in 71 when Alana first took on the building. And the building is a 19th century school. And the reason why it's called PS1 is because it's public school number 1. And only in New York City is this PS system. So it's PS 133, PS 1099. So often, if you're not from New York, like I'm not, you don't know what the PS stands for. So it was the very first public school in Long Island City, which at the time wasn't part of New York. It was just outside of New York. It takes 14 minutes to get from PS1 to MoMA, which is on 53rd Street, because it's 2 subway stops. So it started in 1976 with Alana Heiss, and it was basically a rundown school that had been derelict for a number of years. And these artists kind of occupied it. They had artist studios in there. They were testing out. It was a space outside of the kind of strict institutional kind of mandates that artists could experiment with. And then it became part of the city organizations, because it's on city land, in the early 1980s. And then in 2000 it also merged with MoMA, or became an affiliate of MoMA. So it's got a mum and a dad. It has like the mum is MoMA, the dad is the city, and it's basically this naughty teenager that does all these kind of projects that take risks and kind of like, it likes to think on every level outside of what the norms might be, and kind of think forward and think ahead. So, I mean, the reason why I was asking you about the kind of origins of Tamayo is because I think that one of the things we have in common, but it's very, very different, is this whole idea of being kind of artist-driven or artist-led in some way. Because although Alana wasn't an artist, she set the whole thing up. I mean, she basically was like an artist. It's like she didn't have an office, and she used to work out the local cafe. Never started before 12. So I think it's interesting because it sounds like, from what you were saying, it's like the way Rufino wanted to set the museum up was very much as thinking about a museum, thinking about audiences and structure, whereas with PS1, I think that the artists that first started working there were doing stuff so their friends could come. They weren't really doing stuff for a big audience. So maybe that's one of the differences. But 81, it was set up?
It opened in 81, but they started, actually it's interesting, they started building in 79, and I think he started, if I'm correct, he started thinking about the project of the museum in the early 70s.
Okay.
And
how old was he?
How old?
Yeah, when that all happened. He must have been quite old.
He's late 60s maybe?
Now? Or late 60s then?
Then, sí.
Okay.
No, but it's completely different, because actually what I forgot to say, that probably many of you know that, but you might not know it, is that it was first set as a private museum. So he was collaborating with Emilio Escarrada from Televisa, and as soon as, like the museum opened in 81, they got into a big fight because I guess, like the normal thing, like as Cara being the head of, like this big company who was putting the money in, felt completely entitled to programming and, so there's like all this correspondence between the two of them that is in the archives where, Tamayo is just saying, like it's my museum and it's not your museum, and but it's true that, like he was like really working towards thinking towards a legacy. And what I think is really interesting, which is very similar to Toledo, for example, is that he wasn't thinking, like in personal terms, like not the legacy of his own work again, because, like really the amount of works of his is really small compared to I think that, if I'm correct, the collection was like 350 works back then when it opened. So, and just 11 of them were his. So it's really, like a different kind of, and then as soon as they got into this fight, that's when he decided, like that the museum would become a public museum, and he donated everything, which is, again, something that you don't really get in this country. Like we were just like listening to, like Chinati Foundation, and so that's again, like somebody who has like a fantastic vision and like a really, like generous and like, as you were saying, like vision in the long term also. So,
I mean, it's very different because I think in the US, the whole notion of there being a public institution, the whole history of museums comes out of private individuals funding them. Whether you look at MoMA, which was for women, or the Whitney, or the Guggenheim, or, I mean, we can go on to, like, I'm just being very New York centric there, but it's like, what it takes for a museum to go into the public imagination, to become public in the minds of people, because, MoMA still is private. It's like, and it's interesting with PS1 being on city land, so it's public in this very unusual way. There's I think 31 CIGs they're called, so 31 organisations that are city owned or on city owned land. But to move on from that, what's interesting is with this, because I think when PS1 started, there was no way that Alana or any of the artists were thinking it's going to be amazing on our 50th anniversary. It's like, so when I'm thinking about the 50th anniversary coming up, I know damn well that none of them were ever thinking about it.
So that's going to be 26.
Yes.
Wow.
So, but what's interesting is, as because we've grown up on museums, it's like Tamayo opened in 81, when you're somebody who's aware of it, it's like 76, it's like we're both born in the early 70s, and so we've had the opportunity to go along to these contemporary museums, and so we're really the first generation of directors to come in having always gone along and always taken for granted that there are contemporary art spaces that you can kind of walk into and experience. And I wonder what that means when you start to think about how you want to develop an institution, because I know we've both got quite strong opinions about what an institution is, what a contemporary art institution is and isn't. So I wonder if you, because I thought of the question, could you say some of the things that you think are really important in terms of institutions, contemporary art institutions today, and then I can kind of add into it. And
that's a tough one, because I wouldn't like to nail it down to one single model, no? There's all these different models.
I'm thinking, when we were talking the other week, that the role of kind of supporting younger generation people working in museums and kind of opening things up, shifting the hierarchies.
Yes.
Because we all know that within contemporary art institutions, like any institution, there's a kind of hierarchical structure that both of us think needs shifting.
That's definitely something that I've been working on. I started, as you said, as we know, 5 months ago, so it's been really it's been a tough start, because on the top of it, the museum was without a director for quite a few months, probably 5 or 6 months. So of course, that gets things get really, really all over the place. But I've been really just I want to start with, definitely, my formation is, curatorial for sure. and that's something that I know that I don't want to give up. So I'm like really, like, and I'm sure you're probably in the same situation. Like, I'm gonna keep, like the position of chief curator somehow to, of course, like get, like a strong hold on the program. But I definitely want to not only, like collaborate with my colleagues, like like Humberto, who was just there, who has now joined me as a deputy director and senior curator, but also Andres Valtierra and Pamela Dejada, who are the like junior curators. And I think it's strange, but well, at least in their case, I think they really need, like that kind of what would the word be? Just like they need like some sort of confidence to be created around them, like, because I think like I could feel that there was like a very strong hierarchical model before. And again, like as we were talking, like it's also like there's a generational shift. There's no way I can keep track of everything that is going on, like in terms of younger artists and all of that. So I know in which, like terms I want to start like leading the institution, but I really want to have, like all the input coming also from them and people from the outside of the institution too. Like I don't want the institution to be like this, like self-contained bunker, which just produces things, but like really, like to open up and reach out and just get like the input from other people, and really have a like a very close collaboration also between the different departments, like public programming and education.
Yeah, flattening the fact, because so often it's like exhibitions are the most important thing ever, and then the public programs are second, education third-ish, with marketing, and and it basically means that it's it's sending a strong message as to how you interact with a museum. Because if you're somebody who's a new visitor, you may not be into the exhibitions immediately. You may come in through a different angle, and it's like.
And there's a very like strong tradition, or more than a tradition, I think it's an inertia in Mexico around, like, for example, educational departments. Like, it was always like the, like the last of the line. And they were basically like, like traditionally, they were just like the ones, if you were lucky, you would write a wall label, and if not, it was just like you doing workshops for kids, which meant, like holding Criolas, and that's something also that I really want to change, no? And I think it's been changing, and that's global. It's not like, of course not here.
We don't have an education department.
Ah, you don't? Wow.
PS1 doesn't have any staff members working on
that's also
education.
Because it comes from that more experimental line, no?
So I do find it funny, though, that it's in a school, and it has no... But what's brilliant about it is that, of course, there is always a way in which people share ideas and exchange knowledge. And we have this fantastic series called Sunday Sessions. And it was called Saturday Sessions, and then it's called Sunday Sessions, but sometimes it's not on Sundays, so we should just call it Sessions. We're just going to change the name. But it's, performances or talks or exchanges, but it's always with kind of younger generation artists or older generation artists that are dealing with the urgent issues of our time, the social and the political and the cultural urgencies. And so what I think is great is that there's actually been a ton of stuff that you could see in terms of forward-thinking education that's been happening because of the kinds of information that's been shared. But it hasn't actually kind of been structured so that you could start bringing in some other people and you could start to kind of open things up and expand things a bit further. So I think that I've got a really strong foundation for developing a department that will not be called education. I'm trying to think of a new name because education is so top down. Right. So what do you call it? Like there's, in museums now it's like there's learning departments, there's like research and learning, there's mediation, there's all these words that are basically the kind of secret education words.
And what about, how do you think that, like the relationship with MoMA, like as soon as PS1 became part of MoMA, how did that like impact the this, like openness that PS1 used to have. It still has it, but of course, like recently we've seen more and more, like shows of more established artists like Bruce Nauman or Mike Kelly, which I think is great, but it definitely changes somehow the profile that it had before, no?
Yeah, it's interesting because the marriage happened in 2000, but Alana continued to work there. And so I wasn't really around. I moved to the United States in 2001, and I first went in like 97, but I wasn't in New York, I was in San Francisco, so I didn't I'm too young really, I was a baby curator, so I didn't really know what was going on, but I would love to be a fly on the wall to see how Alana, with all of her rebellious ways of acting, what the conversations were between her and Glenn Lowry to make this arrangement happen in the first place. But they came to an agreement. I think they were both very, the story goes now that it was, it made sense. Basically, PS1 was going to go bankrupt. MoMA has always been interested in kind of experimentation. When you think about Alfred Barr, the founder of the Museum of Modern Art, he was 29 when he founded that. And he was thinking very much about the future, because it was the first museum of modern art. It was thinking, modern meaning contemporary at that time. So I think it kind of makes sense in this way. Then when Klaus Biesenbach became the director, the first director, he had a position at MoMA and at PS1, and I don't have that. So now we're kind of it's the first time they've put a director in place that isn't a chief curator at MoMA as well. And I know very much that I was employed to start working the relationship out with people, to start to look at it and to start to see what is needed. Because as many of you might know, there's the new MoMA as well. MoMA's just expanded and extended, and so now they have a studio space that is for performance and all the types of things that PS1 used to be like the cool place to go and see all this stuff. You can see it at MoMA now. So now it's fantastic to have the opportunity to think through, PS1 doesn't need to do anything that it was doing to support MoMA for these last 20 years. So what can it do now? So I'm really thinking through that. And so to go back to this whole kind of starting point with artists, one of the things I'm really trying to work out is what it means to say that you are an artist-centric, or you're putting artists at the heart of, or the artist is the most important thing when you're developing an institution. Because I don't know that we really understand what that means. Because I wonder what the future of art practice is. How many of you are practicing artists here? Yeah, so there's a lot of you. And when you think about how, the way that you make art is changing, what the topics are, the kinds of materials, the genres, you can cross over between genres. It's moved so much, even since the 80s. When Tamayo was open to now. It's so when we are taking institutions on and we know that we want artists to play a very important role in them, because that's the history and that's what we believe in, what does it look like? What kind of spaces? I don't mean architecturally, I mean mentally. What kind of spaces do you need to make in a museum? What kind of programs? Does it have to be exhibitions? What are exhibitions for? Trying to think through that. But I know, because I think the difference between Magalí and I, we've worked together quite a lot, but the difference is Magalí is an incredible exhibition maker. Magalí thinks in exhibitions. It's kind of in the round, and I think programmatically. I like making exhibitions, but I think in terms of seriality or developing things that expand over time. So I'm a kind of time person, and you're a kind of tabula rasa. It's where you can kind of see everything all at once. So, I wonder, because I know exhibition making is very important to you, so what do you think about the role of the artist and the exhibition in an institution? Because I'm trying to understand that.
I don't know. You already asked me that and I didn't know how to respond to that. But no, I don't. It depends. I don't know. Really,
So I'll tell you a bit about what I'm thinking and see what you think about it. So in PS1, I'm thinking, okay, we can have some rooms that have exhibitions that are the normal period, like every 3 months, every 4 months, the exhibition changes. So 3 times a year, there's a new exhibition that's on that you know you can come and see. But then what about some of the other spaces really slowing down? Because I know many artists who make projects that you can't just put into an exhibition and just show like a couple of things. I'm thinking about a group show or something like that. It's like, it's important to see the work over time. It's important to see how the project develops. Mm-hmm. It's important to see the kinds of conversations that happen in an artist's work. And so what if some of the spaces were handed over to more of a kind of artist-led, so you don't necessarily need a curator, you just need somebody to facilitate making sure that that work is up, but let the audience, unmediated, get to see a project in residence, for example. Or what if you speed up one part of the building, because sometimes artists just want to think out loud and do, like when we think about performance, or what's the extension of that? What if artists were able to test out ideas? So it was more of a kind of studio type scenario, but not for a year. It's, you know, when something big that you want to do, we have some space. So, you know, what if you could think about programming the possibility to make work? Or, i.e., does it always have to be that you are, the curator-led exhibitions are the ways that our audience starts to understand the way that art is made?
Mm. No, honestly, I'm still like thinking, you know, like as we speak, and the reality is that I took the job, and there were probably like 3 exhibitions that were programmed. And when I say programmed, that means, you know, like there was a name and a date, but there was no show. So we're like literally catching up with that, which has been tough. And then next year is like the 40th anniversary of the museum, so we need to work on that, like for a specific project. So I'm like literally taking, you know, like this time until probably the middle of next year, after we're done with the celebration of the 40th anniversary, to like really figure that out. But one of the things that I've been like really thinking closely is, and again, this is like very, I guess pretty much also because of my personal story with the museum, how to fragment the space. Because I've been there, again, you know, like in and out like for 20 years. And basically, the circulation is always the same. So that's something that becomes, like for me personally, becomes boring, and I guess for many of you it might also be, you know, like, if not boring, you know, like it just becomes, how do you say that?
It's not a surprise. You don't get excited
Exactly.
about the building because it becomes so familiar.
So I really, that's one of the things that I really want to like rethink, you know, like rethink the use of the space and the architecture in terms of the programming, but I'm not very clear as to how. For sure there's the patio, and you know, like I don't want to replicate to the Turbine Hall or anything like that, but I think it would be like really interesting to use that for more, you know, like kind of performative projects, so you can actually like activate that. Like I don't mean like stop show.
Park.
And we have a park.
I mean,
exactly.
It's so incredible to actually walk through that park to get to.
And we have like plenty of other museums around. So I also want to, you know, like start collaborations with other museums. There's like the Anthropology Museum, the Museum of Natural History, which is a disgrace, but it's a fantastic and beautiful, you know, like building, and they have like an incredible collection. So why not, you know, like bring, I'm just like speaking out loud, but Mark Dion to do a project there and in the museum. So I'm really like thinking more about that, you know, like also like institutional collaborations. And then, you know, like, as you said, I'm probably more like an exhibition person and an artist person. So, but I'm also like, I discovered recently that I love creating shows with dead artists. It's like, it's a completely different practice.
Because like, they don't argue.
Exactly. So it's really, you know, like very enjoyable. So I'd like to go on, you know, like doing that kind of thing. Because it's really like 2 different practices. And both of them are really exciting. And again, you know, like another, and again, I'm just like, you know, working this out, but this is like a conversation we've had like a long time ago, and you know about it, but I want to start doing like individual, like solo exhibitions of two artists that can actually meet at a very specific point, which could be a photograph or a piece that is an homage to, like, from one to the other, like do those kind of things. So like really work out more, like those kind of dialogues between artists. Me being like the, like curator or like the artifice, maybe, I don't know, which is like, that's probably the downside of curatorial work for many artists, Yeah. But
so we've been given the signal that it's time to open things up to you if you have any questions. So I'm going to ask Magalí one more because I'm warning you. So then like you can think about it. So Magalí, you mentioned in the car today, whilst we were driving over, something that we have in common is an interest in ecology and what ecology means for museums. So I just want to ask Magalí what she's thinking about in relation to ecology so that you can be coming up with your questions.
A very big question again, and I won't have like a very clear response, but like to start with, like the museum is in the middle of the park. So, like that's, as you said, like that's something we really need to take into account. And again, I think in terms of collaborations, there's like so much to do. Like we were just like saying, like, I don't know, like the restaurant, like I think, like if we're going to have like a program that deals with those kind of issues, I think that everything around the museum, like it has to be like a whole, like coherent whole. So
it's like thinking about a sustainable museum or a sustainable institution and what its responsibility is to where it is.
I think everything, no? And of course, like in a very like inside the box, like way of thinking, we just need to all become like more responsible about all these things. No? And I have a 13-year-old, and I've learned like so much through her eyes. And I was telling you, like that's another, like very specific topic or issue that I want to address and to be present, because I've learned so much through my kid that I really think that we need, like, and specifically ecology. As you know, we weren't trained that way. Like we were like very badly fed. We have like all sorts of, like health issues, like all those kind of things that are just like coming up. I've been just like learning them, like recently, and I guess, like we've all become aware of that, like very recently. And again, Mexico we've been like really late into all those things. So it's more about creating awareness, and it's not about, like having like a big banner saying, like that recycle or, like more women in the program. It's more about, like really creating the conditions at all levels, like exhibitioning, like restaurant programming, collaborations, like with other museums, like whatever like, public programming, just creating more awareness about that, because that's something that it's really stupid to say, but that's how I learned, and really, like I think it's about empowering people in a way, like empowering kids and empowering women, which again doesn't mean, like we're gonna have like more workshops for kids to draw with an artist, but the other way around, like really, I think we need to teach grown-ups what we've been learning through kids and through, like all these other issues.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, your turn. Questions?
You clearly have a lot of experience and you come a long way to get to where you are now. And you've talked about these ideas for the future, but I'm curious as what would you have told yourselves when you were starting? What would you have advised or wished someone had told you when you were only beginning this amazing journey?
Not to worry. I spent so many years panicking because if you're really passionate about something, you work really hard, you fall over many times, you pick yourself back up, but I was constantly worrying that I wasn't doing enough, and constantly worrying, it's like, oh, did I do that right, or did I think in the right direction, or I could have done this. It's like, you realize that you spent so much time being anxious. It's like, if you're passionate and you want to do something, go for it and don't worry so much. That's what I tell somebody.
No, same thing. Like, I think you're totally right. And what is actually funny is that you spend like so much time panicking, and then you actually, or I wasn't like really thinking about the future. You're just like thinking about doing things now, because that's, you know, like, and that's probably the beauty of being young. Also, you know, like when you're in your 20s and 30s, you're just like doing things, no, and resolviendo. You know, like you need to make things work out, and that's it. You know, like when I did my first Peter Winnow show, I was just like, you know, I'll do it, you know, like, and I went to see like all these different people, and I was like thinking small, you know, like, and then it suddenly became big, but I was just like doing things. So yeah, not
yeah, be brave and don't panic,
and don't think too much, just do it. I think so. No?
So our previous conversation before this one was centered on being on the periphery, and I think both of you are in an unusual position where you're on some sort of periphery but still very much relevant and at the center, you know, being in Long Island City or being in Mexico City, which is, you know, not New York, but also, you know, not Marfa. So my question is, how does the physical location of your institutions change the way you think about them? And then also, because I'm more familiar with New York City, just for Kate, how do you think about the way that Long Island City is changing and how PS1 is becoming, you know, less of a periphery because Long Island City is becoming more of a focus?
So for those of you that don't know Long Island City well, it's like it's now the fastest growing neighborhood in the country, in the United States. When PS1 first moved in there were 7,000 people that lived in the neighborhood. Now there's 170,000. And there's like 10,500 more apartments being built that will be ready for occupation by 2021, which will take us up to 200,000. And that's just in the walking distance area of PS1. So there's this very, very dominant wall that kind of, basically there was a wall put up around PS1 in the 70s, and it was to create a sanctuary because it was a rough neighborhood that was industrial, where nobody really lived, where the lights weren't on, and so there was this kind of protecting of all these artists doing this crazy stuff in there. And I'd like to break that wall down and start having a conversation with the neighborhood in a very, very different way. And I think in relation to the kind of periphery and center, I don't understand the center. I mean, I think it depends on how you think. You know, there are certain people that want to work at the center and certain people that don't. So this is the first time I've got pretty close to being, I mean, PS1 is a pretty well-known place, and it's in a pretty well-known city. And it's really interesting because it's harder to bring in ways of thinking and to take risks because of the fact that the lens is always on you and people are always making judgment values no matter what. And it's like, that's something that for me is going to be a learning curve, because I'm not going to change what I think should happen just because New York City thinks that it's something big, because I don't care about it. I don't think New York is the center of the universe. So
I don't know, I don't know. I'm just thinking, you know, like that, again, you know, like thinking about my position makes me think about the history of course, the museum and the city. And, you know, like 20 years ago, when we started, like this city has, I don't know, over 200 museums, you know, like that's really a blessing, but it's true that, you know, like it took us, like it was like really, you know, like our generation, you know, like Osvaldo Sanchez, Ramiro Martinez, all these people that really, you know, like placed these institutions somewhere near the center, you know, like for many different reasons, not only in terms of programming, but also, you know, like professionalizing the people who work there. And so I don't know, you know, like, of course, again, you know, like there wasn't like the social media, there wasn't the internet back then, so it was really, you know, like it was really tough to get to where we are without all those like instruments, because it's really, you know, like there were tools, like really. So now, I'm not sure you can like really think about it in terms of, you know, like center or periphery. As Kate was saying, of course, you know, like it's probably easier here because you don't have such a big, you know, like cultural offer as in New York, but still.
But if you I mean, there's so many interesting things going on in Mexico border, like in Querétaro, for example.
Mm-hmm.
You know, where there's an incredible museum that's just opened up, and it's like, in there, Mexico City is like, I mean, if you speak to Papus, who's running that museum, you know, you're really in the center. It's just like,
yes,
it's like the mafia is all in Mexico City, and then it's like,
and then,
so,
you know, like there's like, I don't know, there's MUAC, there's Carrillo, you know, like there is, and it becomes like easier and easier, and always more difficult, you know, like it's like that kind of paradox, no? It's like easier to make like great shows with great artists. Of course, it becomes like more difficult because it's becoming like more expensive to do the shipping and all of that, so it's a kind of paradox. But then, you know, like you just need to work it out. And I've never been a person who's thought about, you know, like in geographical terms. Or maybe I am that person, but I've never thought about them in those terms. So I'm just like, you know, again, you know, like I don't believe in those kind of, you know, like barriers, and I know they're there, but just by, like in my case, I guess, by ignoring them, I've been able to fight them and break
Maggie's ignored them her entire career.
And they're there, you know, like, but like literally, in my case, I guess, you know, like ignoring them just like men breaking through, and that's it.
So I think we've got time for 2 more questions. So there's one there, and I thought there was one over there, or is there not one? Maybe there's only one.
I have a question for each of you, which is, what is your dream for your institution that you would like to leave as your legacy, or in the people that you can say, I did this at your museum?
Kate or me? Both of us. That's an even tougher one than Kate's. I don't know, I would love to have, I love that museum again, you know, and I think it's such a beautiful building. So like, first of all, and that's my aim for next year, put it back into shape, because it really needs to, you know, like it has some leaks and, you know, like the like regular things, so and it's not like too difficult, so that's going to be like the immediate, you know, like goal for next year. And just, again, you know, it's very silly and very simple, but I just love doing beautiful exhibitions and working with beautiful artists and getting things done. So like really, you know, just to, I guess, to get a program that really reaches out to people who can, you know, like not only get to know the artist's work, but also like enjoy it. I think that's, again, like very simple and very silly to say, but very difficult to achieve, you know, like to really manage to break through in terms of, you know, like introducing the work of some artists that are not specifically known in Mexico, and make them, you know, like accessible and enjoyable, which is not always the case, you know, like when, and again, I go and see exhibitions, I'm probably a little bit too, how do you say that?
Exhibition centric.
No, I have high expectations always, you know, like of, I'm just like blanking on the word, but like really to make it an enjoyable place, which means a lot, again, you know, like really in terms, it needs to be like a very organic place, like in order to attract people, you know, and because if you don't have like the audience, I mean, if you don't have the public, it's a complete failure. So, and again, it's not only about like reaching out through educational programs or public programming, but I think it's really, you really need to create like a whole experience in those terms. So.
I like the fact that you asked when we leave, so if I leave next week, then I've done it. It's like, I've told you everything. For me, what's really important is, I don't think it's about any one person. I think that we represent, there's a group of people out there that it's not about them. It's like these institutions are gifts to be working with. There's a way in which, like, your team, you know, as Magalí said, you know, you need people with different minds. So it's to think about how to take the institution off this pedestal, how to almost kind of not take it back to where it was, because it needs to be like where it is. It needs to be completely contemporary, but it needs to like get off its pedestal and really relate. It needs to be needed. It needs to be useful. It needs to be a place in which art, like why art matters, can be answered. Get it? I think if there's no more questions, we will say, oh, there you go. I thought there was one. And then we will...
It's not actually for me. It's
Okay. Oh, hi. I guess I am able to understand the work both of you have put in, like all of the projects you have seen for yourselves, and I guess my question is a little bit more about the progress or the journey inside of this industry, and I would say in a ruthless world that mostly women don't have as much opportunities to get into positions where you are. I would like to know what are the kind of struggles that you've managed to put through to get in the position where you are now.
We need a drink for this one.
Very much.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to decide that you're not going to listen. It's like, it's one of those things where we do have this conversation all the time, and it's like from 20 years ago to now, just being able to actually find colleagues that become friends where you can talk things through is extremely important, because the whole, like, in this art world, you know, it's extremely, extremely difficult to do anything without feeling extremely kind of pressured. And like, you know, you're being kind of judged and viewed, and it's speeding up all the time. It's getting harder and harder. And so, you know, being able to talk things through, it's like lifelong learning. You don't have to be in school to still have to learn an awful lot of lessons constantly, and so I think that's really important. I think I'm proud to be a woman doing what I'm doing. And I think that it's something I use that as my power. And I think that that's really, really important as well, because it's one of those things where you can look at the inequities, and you know, there's still an awful lot of inequities, and you can take that as the starting point. Or you could just say, I mean, Magalí, honestly, sometimes I'm just like, Magalí, you do know you're a woman, right? Because it doesn't cross her mind at all. It's just like, nothing's going to stop her from, like, and she is a woman for sure, but, you know, nothing's going to stop her from, and I think it's one of those things where, you know, to be able to talk things through with people that you trust, and not to take the barriers that are put in front of you because other people say it is as anything that you need to be kind of telling yourself. We often restrict ourselves an awful lot more than like the outside world does, because it's us that gets to our heads quicker.
Yeah, I guess, as Kate said, in my case, I think I simply ignored it, and that was also because I was lucky enough. That's something I discovered like a few years ago. I was lucky enough, like all these years, to have worked with fantastic people who never put me in that position. So
I was put in the position.
And then I was put in that position, and it was like literally hell. And then there isn't much you can do about it. So it's like really tough.
Yeah, you just talk a lot. You have to talk things. Just realize that you're going to be in school for the rest of your life. It's just that you don't have to pay for it, apart from drinks for each other. And yeah, you just need to, Skype is your friend.
And I think it's really, you know, like what I was saying before, it's more about, you know, like we always think about those things in terms of numbers and statistics, and, you know, like how many women in that show and how many women at PS1 and I really don't think it works that way. It's more, as I was saying before, it's more about empowering people, and there's like so many different ways of doing that, which is not like, giving you a show because you're a woman. That's like literally not interesting for me, like, and that's definitely not something I'm gonna do. What I really want to do is to like implement those things like through content. Again, I'm reaching out to the right people, and then, like, again, talking about education. It's like really, like when I was just talking about kids, like that's like really something that is really important for me in this country at this moment, just because of what we're going through in terms of, like politics and, like violence. There's going to be like a whole bunch of kids out there just like without parents, etc. There's like migrations, all of that. We need to sensibilize people to that, and that's like through like I guess that's through a great like programming and like again picking the right artists, the interesting artists with a certain sensibility, and implementing the like sharing that sensibility with other people so that we can like actually like really create a shift like in people's mind. But it's not about statistics and like, and then you hit the wall and you hit the wall, but like you need to just like again get up and continue, and it's never easy, but that's the way it is, no?
All right, thank you very much. It was great to nearly meet you.